It seems that the community is a bit divided. There is a bit of infighting.
Whole mess around off-return rollout is again one of the worst technical rollout I've seen in my career, and honestly, like, it's embarrassing.
If you don't like this so much, go run knots. But good luck on getting a soft fork change to go happen.
Followed money, if you track it back even further, it's a spider's web of shitcoiner, semi-shitcoiner companies everywhere. And
Was this arrogance? All right, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us. Right, so we'll try to address some of the issues head on. It seems that the community is a bit divided. There is a bit of infighting going on, and there are these questions being raised. Obviously, the topic of the panel is arrogance versus ideology. We're going to try to address things head on. So let's just jump straight to it. I think obviously one of the big issues that people are sort of screaming about online is the core v30 op return, the change of let's say the default or the policy. Let's just start with that. So it's a change of the default policy. Was this arrogance? Was it a reasonable update given that users were already bypassing the old default? So let's just start there, guys. Who wants to go first?
Ladies first.
Oh, wow, that's really nice of you. So I wasn't very involved in this, though I did run a conference, I think like 2 weeks after it kind of hit the airwaves, and managed to get a lot of the characters that were involved in it to a conference where they all talked to each other. So I don't know, maybe just from the audience, how many people are familiar with an op return stuff? Like maybe 20%? So just maybe if that's okay, like just to kind of lay some groundwork here, when you're making a Bitcoin transaction, there's a space in it called the op return where you can add some information. And traditionally, prior to, this is last April, prior to Core v30, we're now on
29 even?
version 29. Anyway, we're now on version 31 of Bitcoin Core, so this is a bit of wait time in the past. You were able to put up to 80 bytes, which is kind of a small amount of information. 80 bytes is like what, maybe a name and email address amount of information?
a hash.
A hash, yeah.
A hash, okay.
2 hashes.
Two hashes.
2 hashes to be.
2 hashes and some change. So it was a smallish amount of data, and then that got changed so that you could add almost up to the block size, right? Which is, how big is a block? No, it's only up to megabyte, right? 'Cause it's
No,
arbitrary.
100
In practice, you can only go up to like 100,000 bytes roughly because
And then you can
standard
change
transaction
them.
limits.
And then you can change them.
And 100,000
Multiple.
bytes is like what? Like a picture? Like an essay?
Small picture.
Small picture. Okay, so we went from 2 hashes and some change.
It's a manifesto.
Okay, a manifesto. Anyway, so this all happened. So the proposal was to change this default, more or less. I mean, this wasn't consensus, this was in Relay, right?
Yeah.
So it's like Relay is the ability to send a transaction out across the network. It doesn't have any changes to like what actually gets mined. Anyways, sorry, that's my contribution. So this was a change to the defaults of what's allowed to be relayed. And Peter, so the story I've heard is that Peter talked a developer into changing what the default was.
The developer was me.
Oh, I see.
I mean, so if you go back, I think it was 2020 maybe, this guy, Christopher Allen, who's been known for doing a lot of like Web of Trust stuff, he had some ideas about how you could use larger op returns to do things related to digital identity, Web of Trust, decentralized digital identity, not the government side of it. But he then asked me, well, could you write a patch for Bitcoin Core to make the op return less restricted? And I said, sure, I'll write the patch, but they're not going to accept it. You'll be wasting your money on me. Anyway, he gave me the $1,000 or whatever I charged him to, spend a couple hours writing this, submitted it, and unsurprisingly got rejected. And he was happy with that outcome. He said, well, I'm proving a point. And then later on, for separate reasons, I'd created a fork of Bitcoin Core originally that just did full RBF, which is a whole other default debate. And then the ordinal guys, they thought it would be cool to go and remove the op return restriction. And I pointed out, you can just go do that with my fork. So I just took the code that Christopher Allen had paid me to write, which was trivial, and put it in Libre Relay and just released Libre Relay with that. And very quickly, you could get transactions mined quite easily by just running Libre Relay, and it would get to miners who supported this. His other miners on their own had also removed these restrictions.
So anyway, let's just try to quickly move it forward a little bit. So I guess the point of that is people were trying to argue about whether defaults govern the network or whether actually a small group of people who were more, let's say, permissive with their settings, because either they were running Bitcoin Core with a manually changed setting or they were running Libre Relay, they could just have things sent around the network and mined into the chain, despite many users who did not want that. Now, I guess let's get to Knut and Rockstar. Do you want to answer or do you want to make your point about whether you believe that was arrogant or not? How do you see that?
Okay, I'd like to go even further backwards to when op return was first introduced, which I believe is in 2014.
Standardized in 2014, correct.
So
like that.
the reason that was introduced was that we could see that people were embedding other types of data than monetary data in Bitcoin, which Bitcoin is not for. Bitcoin is for sending and receiving money. That's the original purpose. Bitcoin is money.
Yes. Now, look, before we get, we've got to also talk about the difference between what we want Bitcoin to be and what is practical. Because we can sing.
I'm getting to that, Stefan.
Yeah.
The reason that it was first 40 bytes, not 80 bytes, but 40 bytes, is that that's the length. And theoretically, the length of a hash is all you need to put the entire library of Alexandria onto Bitcoin if you want to. So if you want to add a node, you can just add a hash of a hash of a hash of a hash and add whatever data you want. But Bitcoin was never meant to do this. And the...
Sorry, are you addressing the point about what you want it to be versus what people are doing now?
Yeah, I am coming to that.
Yeah.
So but this is kind of an opening statement then, because you need to know the history to understand the debate, I think.
Okay.
And people wanted to use Bitcoin for other things. Vitalik Buterin, for instance, wanted to take this programmable money to the next level and do all sorts of shit with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin Core was very hostile to that, and therefore he was pushed into doing that on his own chain instead. And in hindsight, I fucking love the shitcoins when they're on their own chains. However, they have no place in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is for Bitcoiners and for people that want to send and receive money. End of story. So the Core 30 thing was changing a mempool policy and thereby signaling to the community that Core is now catering to the needs of people who want to use Bitcoin for other shit. And the rationale for that was that it's better if they put this stuff in the trash can than if they put it somewhere else on the chain. But it also sends the signal that Bitcoin is not only money, it is other shit too. And if you understand the economics, you know that Bitcoin, the other use cases do not add value, they leak value. Like if you use a screwdriver for other things than screwing screws, then less screws get screwed.
Can you please address instead of talking about what you would like? Can you please address the point? You said you would address this. Can you please just answer the point of the difference between what you would like and what is what people is reality?
Can I answer the question, Stefan?
Okay, sure.
I was unsure now if we're debating 2 or 3, like if you're on that side. I'm joking. I
have those on our side, so it doesn't matter.
I don't want to get into sides. I want to also answer that, to me, arrogant is a too strong of a word. I would really like what I see, what happened, I would say it's very unfortunate. As someone who has been in software development industry for over 2 decades, seeing the whole mess around off-return rollout is, again, one of the worst technical rollouts I've seen in my career. And honestly, like, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that we as Bitcoiners, as well-intentioned Bitcoiners, are still stuck on these like trash cans that were intended as trash cans and are not working as trash cans, because I looked, there are 396 transactions ever since this was released It is funny, Peter, that all this craziness that happened in our community is over minuscule, worthless transactions. And those of us that were saying that these trash cans will not work, that's the biggest thing. It's like we were ridiculed, like our reputation was attacked over saying something that's true. And that's what worries me the most, is that community who lets people who speak truth be attacked and tolerates that is community that doesn't have bright future. So you heard how much people clap for Bitcoin is money. Can we get another round of applause?
Okay.
So Bitcoin is money. Let's go towards that. Let's refocus ourselves on the mission, and the mission is separating state
So
and
look,
money.
I'm not really hearing a lot of addressing the reality versus the virtue signal. Can we please address the question? All right. Well, Peter, do you want to speak?
My answer, Stephen, was it's not arrogant. It was unfortunate.
Just one important thing I want to point out with op return size. So a lot of people pointed to the 40 bytes, saying, well, that's enough to go fit a hash, and with a hash, you can go and put whatever data you need. And that's true in a timestamping sense and in a cryptographic commitment sense in sort of very narrow use cases. But it's very important to recognize that there's a whole class of use cases that are fundamentally about publishing data. Lightning is a good example of this. In Lightning, if you cannot arbitrarily publish data so that the other side is able to then recover basically the state of the Lightning channel when you try to close it without the other person's permission, the system doesn't work. It inherently requires ability to publish a little bit of data. Now, Lightning can get away with doing it with quite a small amount of data due to how it works, but the data has to be unrestricted. If you try to apply any restrictions on what the content of that data is, Lightning no longer works. And it just gets back to there really are these use cases where proof of publication, knowing that the other side has that data for sure, is very important. And I myself, I'm founder of Open Timestamps, which is, at the moment, seems to be the best way to go timestamp data in the world. Provided you're willing to, live with the constraints of Bitcoin. And the entire world's data, yeah, it all goes onto one hash. But I just have to remind people over and over and over again, timestamping is not sufficient for many use cases. And that's just the reality of it. And getting back to, I think, your point about what's sort of reality and what isn't, like it or not, we might, I agree that Bitcoin is money, but Bitcoin is also an extremely effective way of publishing data. It's an extremely effective way of storing data for certain use cases. And no amount of us arguing otherwise is going to change that, because that's just what Bitcoin is.
So I think we have to address this because it comes up often, because people will attempt to explain the reality of Bitcoin scripting and the SegWit discount, and we'll get a virtue signal instead of Bitcoin is money. Yes, everyone accepts Bitcoin is money, but here's the thing: the supposed answer that people are proposing now, which is, as an example, BIP 110, will not meaningfully change the cost to spam the chain. So that's just the technical reality. If you invalidate one particular inscription envelope, so I'll try to explain for the audience. There are various ways to spam the chain. One of those ways is to spam into what's called the witness. That method is known as the taproot inscription envelope. BIP 110 is taking away one of those methods of putting things into that witness. But here's the challenge. As long as we have Bitcoin script and as long as we have the SegWit discount, spammers can simply use an alternate inscription envelope and spam with very similar level of quote-unquote spamming efficiency in terms of spam versus script bytes. That difference has been calculated at something like 0.4% less efficient. So is it a virtue signal?
Yeah.
Should the community be driving this contentious consensus change at developer cost, ecosystem coordination cost, to only increase the cost by 0.4%? What do you guys think?
Yes, okay, let me address this. It is a virtue signal, but it's actually signaling virtue. It's not like a virtue signal in fiat clown world. This is another type of virtue signaling, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is not its code. Bitcoin is the people running the code and the people using it as money, the people the users are the network. We are literally the Satoshis, as I'd like to say, because we, at the end of the day, it's dependent on what code people voluntarily choose to run. And if the users are now disappointed with the direction that Core has taken by having this defeatist attitude of it's not going to do anything, and as you say, it's it's pointless. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. If we disagree with that, the only way we can meaningfully disagree with that is to run other node software. So we switch to another thing, and the Core v30 op return mempool policy default limit. I can't even say these things. The reaction to that, like Core knew that a large part of the network didn't like this change, and they went along with it anyway, showing that showing arrogance to people, and BIP 110 is a reaction to that. What it does is that it temporarily changes the rules back to what it was in 2023, and then after about a year, the rules are opened again. But this is to send a clear virtue signal to the spammers and the shitcoiners that you do not belong here. This is not your thing. We're going to do, even if you can route around this and you can do this and that, like, of course shitcoiners are going to say that. Of course spammers are going to say that, because they don't like this thing. This is the only tool in the toolbox right now for showing that we, the users of Bitcoin, the people who want Bitcoin to be money, this is the only tool we have right now for going against what the developers have done. And the developers, if you want to know what went wrong in Core, like this is like a lot of things leading up to this. You should read Hodlonaut's articles. It's written 4. The third one is coming out on Monday or Tuesday. The first 2 are available in Citadel 21 magazine, or you just look up Hodlonaut on Twitter, and you can read them. And this is the best investigative journalism ever in Bitcoin, I think. And you can see what happened to Core from 2019 and onwards, and that it's no longer meritocracy, but infested with wokeism and bad behavior. So
okay, so let's address that. So Lisa or Peter, do you want to address?
So, I mean, I think the last part of what you said, the wokeism, bad behavior, all that, I mean, that's really orthogonal to this entire issue. I mean, you know, I could go criticize Core on various aspects of that, but it's just not relevant to the discussion we're having about mempool policy. Now,
but this is not a discussion about mempool policy. It's a discussion about arrogance versus ideology.
Right, but the reason why that's relevant is a discussion about mempool policy. And the thing with the mempool policy in that regard is, I think, you know, of course, I haven't really been a Bitcoin Core developer for quite a while now. You know, I don't regularly contribute to Core. You could say I indirectly contribute to Core by Libre Relay, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah. But I think it's fair to say that from the Core developers' point of view, they're just not interested in spending a lot of their time doing development on things that you openly admit are virtue signaling. You know, there are just more effective things to do. And particularly when we're talking about things like ordinals and inscriptions, like it or not, those are kind of flash-in-the-pan fads. Had we just done nothing about it at all, and not given them a pile of free advertising on Twitter hating on them, probably they would have died a lot earlier. And you know, I have seen some of the meme coin stuff in other chains, you know, notably Solana. I mean, you know, I'm repping Lada here, I guess you could say. But that whole ecosystem works really well and is really good tech because they just lean straight into centralization and don't really care. And from what they want out of it, it works fine. You know, from the Bitcoin Core point of view, do we want to spend a lot of time like trying to fight things that are probably going to die off soon? And when you get down to, you know, user freedom, well, yeah, go run knots. Like, if you don't like this so much, go run knots. But, you know, good luck on getting a soft fork change to go happen, because from the mining point of view, it doesn't look like there's consensus anything close to do this.
So Peter,
Challenge accepted.
That's the thing. Is like, yeah, so these people are getting grants to work and create software that serves Bitcoin users, and they should be encouraged to say, oh, go run knots.
Yeah, I think it is quite fair to go and say, yeah, we're getting, Bitcoin Core is getting
Okay,
grants.
okay, we
Hang on, hang on.
disagree.
Let me finish.
Like,
I'd
my
say it's
God.
quite fair to say, yeah, Bitcoin Core is getting grants to go and work on Bitcoin Core and improve Bitcoin Core in various ways, such as cluster mempool and so on and so forth. And what's happening there is they're saying, we're not going to use this money on virtue signaling, because like it or not, doing virtue signaling uses a lot of dev bandwidth. It takes hours of work to go validate changes.
Oh my God. Well, wait, so what? I need to go back to GitHub and virtue signal the way I virtue signaled as a developer last 10 years? Or you guys will just keep using that word against me?
So Roxar, let's just address this though, because what I see and how I understand this is, it's like the NOTs and BIP110 crowd are upset about other people doing things on Bitcoin that they don't like. So I think this is also an important question of what should Bitcoin implementations focus on? Should they focus on trying to make Bitcoin better for the good users, or should they make Bitcoin to try to punish the bad users or the bad people? I think that's probably a fundamental question here, because if you believe in just trying to make it better for the good users, you're going to have a different outcome from, hey, I want to try to virtue signal or punish bad people in Bitcoin. What do you think?
The two are the same. Like the reason that Lightning is okay is because it facilitates Bitcoin transactions. Lightning transactions are Bitcoin transactions. We're sending Satoshis back and forth, and it facilitates easier use of that. That's what the users want. We want Bitcoin to be money, send, receive, end of story. Like so if that means so sure, develop things like the Lightning Network that makes that easier. But if you do things like that, and it also makes shitcoining on Bitcoin easier, you shouldn't do that. And back to the funding thing,
okay.
Like in the beginning, core developers didn't have funding. The reason they were core developers, and I mean, from what I understand, it's because they had Bitcoin stacks and they wanted to secure those stacks and make Bitcoin work. Like, that might not be true for Peter.
No,
but
I
it was,
don't think that was true for most developers.
Okay. I think it was true, and I think that you introduced a new attack vector once core developers got funding from the outside. Because if you look at the people who are funding the core developers, and if you followed money, if you track it back even further, it's a spider's web of shitcoiner, semi-shitcoiner companies everywhere, and the money is pulled into. And the thing you said about us giving these fads a voice or whatever, that's not us, that's David Bailey and company doing platforming all sorts of this shitcoinery on Bitcoin. That's why I don't attend the Bitcoin conference anymore. I don't think these things are Bitcoiner things. In fact, I think they are the opposite, and I think core developers, a part of their job description as developers of software that users actually use. I have never been a core developer, but I've been a Bitcoin user for over a decade. And the product I want you to provide me with is a product that absolutely does everything in its power to kick the fucking shitcoiners out forever.
Knut, here's the problem with that. I want to address this because I think we have to address this point, because are we going to reach a point where, in order to kind of maximally fight shitcoins and spam, as you see it, what level are you willing to go to make Bitcoin worse in terms of scripting? So, for example, BIP110 invalidates or attacks, let's say, miniscript in Taproot, which does impact things like inheritance. So, to what level are you willing to? How far are you willing to go to cut down Bitcoin scripting for your chosen,
Now, someone
signal?
posted, Rockstar can probably knows more about this than I do, but op-if is now being used, 99.x% is being used for scripts that cannot even execute. Is that?
Well, it's the inscriptions. And
So this is just crap. It's not being used for what the things we intended. Taproot is not being used for the things it was intended for. There's an exploit, and it's being there's a bug, and it's being exploited, and it's being used for also. And so we should be humble enough to realize when we made a mistake and try to correct course, and not like oh, this
Hey,
is
hang on. Are you
it's that
saying-
dog sitting in hell. That, oh, this is fine. It's
are we-
not fine. We have shitcoins on bitcoins now. That's not fine
Shitcoins
at
have
all.
been on Bitcoin for a long time. I think it's what we should address is, okay, you know what, I'd like to ask either Lisa or Peter this question. Do you view Taproot as having a bug? Because that was the accusation that Knut is, so, I mean, in the shitcoin spam sense, not in the, you know,
Yeah.
not the not like X only stuff, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I'm laughing because Stefan and I had a conversation yesterday about a particular decision that was made about Taproot, which is completely unrelated to this, which I would say is definitely
Yeah, I mean, for the purpose of shitcoining or
from
spamming,
the thing,
let's
from a
say.
shitcoin or spamming. No, I don't think there was. I'm a little bit of a radical, I think, in terms of, I think some of the core issues here tend to be economic issues, or like a lot of what we're desiring in terms of usage of how Bitcoin block space. I mean, really, this is a conversation about Bitcoin block space, right? What gets into the space that is considered a block for Bitcoin. One of the decisions that was made in the SegWit, I call it the omnibus bill that changed Bitcoin, because SegWit included a large number of changes to how the protocol works. One of them was something that was called the witness discount. How many of you here are familiar with the witness discount? I know I hate doing, all right, so our stage, a handful of people in the audience. So there's parts of a Bitcoin transaction when you're making it, you pay a quarter or 25% of the fee that same information in a different part of the transaction would pay. So it's a discount in terms of how many Satoshis you have to actually pay to commit data into a Bitcoin block. This was introduced in SegWit.
Why? Can you address why it was introduced? What the intent was?
Economic transactions.
Yeah.
So this is embarrassing because I feel like I have listened to some of the authors of SegWit explain it, and I don't exactly remember. My generalized idea is that they were thinking that you would be able to either get rid of or compress that data, so it wasn't a long-term storage cost that you would be accruing. Once you validate the signature data, your node can, in theory, throw it away.
I think the other point was just the consolidation of the UTXO set. I think they were saying they were trying to change the ratio such that people would consolidate outputs instead of creating new ones.
It makes it cheaper to go spend outputs than it was before, which encourages there to be less. But frankly, I'd say the number one thing that was in the SegWit discount was purely because people at the time wanted a block size increase. And that was a one-time block size increase that we could go give them.
If you think about, I mean, again, I like thinking about these changes kind of almost as you would as like legislation that the community, an open consensus is considering, right? Because these protocol rules become kind of the laws that we all have to follow when we transact with Bitcoin going forward. If you think of like SegWit as kind of, again, like omnibus bill, at least in the American sense, is you have to get a bunch of different parties to agree. And so we see some compromises kind of inside this. And one of the compromises was this block size increase that was, so prior to SegWit, you could only have 1 megabyte size blocks. Afterwards, on paper, it still looks like 1 megabyte size blocks, but it can be up to 4 megabytes hand wave. And how that was achieved was via this discounting of certain sections of a Bitcoin transaction, which we call the witness. And typically the data that you put in there, sorry, I'm talking a lot about this, but typically the data that you put in the witness is signatures and information that you would need to prove that you have the right to spend Bitcoin. So it's your kind of authentication or,
And Lisa, this is where I think you made a great point, that you look at it as a legislation and, they come together, omnibus bill. But that's, for me, another core issue with what happened with version 30, is that we are having more and more situations where there is a concentrated group of people, less than 30, who are now meeting every 6 months, deciding what they're going to ram through, and then the community that disagrees doesn't get to vote.
I mean, I think, you come back to this concept of the consent of the governed, right? Like the people that are running the software.
Governed
Notably,
consent.
like the really important difference between what Lisa was just talking about and what you're talking about there is, one is a difference in consensus rules and the other isn't. And like it or not, when we run Bitcoin Core or
God.
Bitcoin Knots, The consensus rules are consenting to allowing people to do things like run Libre Relay and put in op returns and blocks that are huge. That's just how it is. Now, yeah, BIP 110 may work to go change that, but I think the fundamental thing here is that none of the core people, so I don't think anyone involved in Libre Relay, believes that BIP 110 has any chance of actually making a consensus change. And until you have that, I mean, it's kind of a silly discussion to go have.
I mean, it is silly. Like, you're sitting in front of the crowd, talking about, like, oh, you're what they're allowing to be governed, or you're. I can't believe we're having these types of discussions. And then when it comes to you, Peter, I told you already backstage, you're like, oh, I'm not a core dev. You have been annoyingly one of the most efficient core devs, ramming through RBF, changing the behavior of Bitcoin network, ramming through the policy relaxations, changing the behavior of Bitcoin network. But this is where I would love if developers like you working on Bitcoin, yeah, you just don't do it for your own enjoyment and being like, oh, you're governed. It's like, no, let's listen to the users. Let's interpret what they're asking in a technical way. Because to me, I agree with you, Livera, is just we shouldn't be getting into who are good users, bad users, good use case, bad use case. We can talk about specific problems, and people like Knut have been talking about problems like UTXO set pollution. I, on BTCPay Server, get to deal with every day with the fact that UTXO set grew from 4 gigabytes to 13, and BTCPay Server can no longer run on certain configurations.
I don't think Bitcoin core devs are really in disagreement with you about there, other than the fact that they're in very strong disagreement about what's actually realistic. I mean, something I wanted to go bring up, talking about like so-called shitcoinery, is now we have taproot assets.
No, we
don't.
They're not assets.
Hang on. We have taproot assets, the protocol, which allows you to go and do things on Lightning that in the end result in moving non-Bitcoin denominated tokens around. Now, when you actually look at what that looks like on the chain, you can't tell the difference between that and a Lightning channel. I mean, with Taproot-based Taproot asset Lightning channels, you wouldn't even know it was a Lightning channel. It would just be yet another Bitcoin moving around. And we just have to accept that there's limits to things that we can even begin to solve. I mean, my own work on like the techniques that led to the RGB protocol, that was all based around, well, you can create consensus systems which from the point of view of Bitcoin just look like coins moving around. And that's it.
Meta protocol kind of ideas.
Peter, you and me can technically argue, like we only have a few minutes left. Yeah. The thing is, there is a way Rob and Linus proposed how we can clean up the UTXO set with having the under dust UTXOs, the ones that have amounts under the dust limit, shift the storage from all the nodes to proof of spending. We could have expiry of UTXO entries that are under dust limit. We can have tons of
and again, there's lots of people willing to talk about consensus changes like that, but only if done in a principled way, which isn't mere virtual signaling. And that gets back to, I think, the big difference here. Core is just unwilling to do virtue signaling. They want technical changes that are meaningful.
So guys, we've only got three and a half minutes left. Let's try to address how we move forward, right? Because obviously everyone's arguing about these different aspects. How do you think the community should move forward on this? Is there a way to heal the divide, let's say? What do you guys think? Just very quick answers, maybe.
I don't think you need to heal.
Is there anything?
It's fine if they wear different hats.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And even if you have tags on them. So, no, for me, less virtue signaling, more productive conversations, more truth-seeking conversations, and more code on GitHub. From my side, I will keep virtue signaling on GitHub. And that's it for me.
Okay, short rant. so for me, Bitcoin is a fixed set of rules. And the reason we agree on this specific rule set is that it's the only rule set known to man that makes it more expensive to try to cheat the rules than to follow them. And that's what allows for the Satoshi to exist. That's why there is a finite amount of Bitcoin and an infinite amount of shitcoins. So that's why we can act as if we own the Satoshi. But you cannot really own information. So every other so-called asset on the internet is just like owning, especially on the Bitcoin time chain, it's just like owning a star in the Andromeda galaxy. Sure, you can say that you own it, but everyone else can access it as much as you can, and you need third-party software to pretend that that's not the case. It's just that these things, they fuck up our telescope, so we can't even look at the Andromeda galaxy in the long run. So that's a far-fetched metaphor. But
Yeah, but how do we move forward?
So the code is supposed to make this rule set that is hard to break the thing, because that's what creates Bitcoin, the organism we know as Bitcoin. So I think the debate is first and foremost about people like me who view Bitcoin as a means of communication first and foremost, and people who view it as a technology first and foremost. So the choice is still yours. You're all already nodes in the Bitcoin network, regardless of if you know that you're a node or not. It's just like most people are not acting the part yet. But you all are. We're all connected. There is no circular economy. The entire world is connected. So start acting the part and do your thing.
I need to give Lisa a chance to comment as well.
The choice you have is trust the experts or think for yourself.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think my final comment is Rockstar Dev mentioned that Peter has been the most effective at getting the things out there. I think one of the reasons for that is because his arguments are persuasive to the technical set. So it's not that they don't hear the arguments, I think it's that they're not persuasive. And so figuring out how to speak in a language where core developers find your arguments persuasive, I think would result in, people being a bit happier about their ability to update or reflect what's happening in both Bitcoin Core on the policy side as well as like wider. And I think when we use words like arrogant, it's like it definitely feels like you're setting yourselves up in opposition to what's happening on Core, which has its own logic, which may be difficult to see if you don't understand the landscape of where the decisions are being made.
All right, well, that's all we have time for. We'll have to leave it there. Everyone, please put your hands together for our panelists. Thank you.